Hi, I'm Justin Moorman.
And I'm Katie Thornton, and this is the Re-Education of Schools podcast,
where we have open, honest conversations about how to better understand social-emotional learning, trauma-informed care, the whys behind student behavior, and how to help kids navigate it all as they go through school and life. All right, welcome to our next episode, End of the World as We Know It, Mental Health Crisis in Our Schools, which is actually a super serious topic and a heavy topic, but the title is so long, and it makes me kind of laugh that it's so long.
And it's kind of gloom and doom, so I'm sorry.
It is, a little bit gloom and doom. Hey, before we get started, if you've enjoyed listening to all of this stuff, again, give us a review. That's always helpful. Preferably 5 stars would be great. Any platform that you're listening to that helps us keep this conversation going. So, End of the World as We Know It. I'm not reading the second part. Mental health crisis. All right, so let's just jump into it.
Yeah.
What are some of the statistics? What does some of the data look like in America as far as mental health crisis?
Yeah, I think it's like no secret. Like if you turn on the TV or talk to any educator, we have a mental health crisis going on with our kids and really our teachers right now.
Sure.
So post-COVID, that really became evident. So here are some facts. We live in the state of Ohio. So here are some facts just from the state of Ohio about what's going on. In December 2021, I have shared this multiple times with people as we've done trainings and those kind of things, protecting youth mental health. The U.S. Surgeon General Advisory actually came out and issued some suggestions for school districts and things that need to be implemented. Lots going on. I don't know how many of them put some of those into action plans, but there is a really good leading foundation in the state of Ohio about what needs to happen. But it really noted the rise in certain mental health symptoms, including depression and anxiety, and suicide ideation during the 10 years leading up to the pandemic. So This has been something that's been in motion. This is not the pandemic didn't set it off, but definitely highlighted what was really going on in our schools at this time. So from 2009 to 2019, mental health challenges were the leading cause of disability and poor life outcomes of young people, with up to 1 in 5 children in the United States having a mental, emotional, developmental, or behavioral disorder. So that's pretty significant data there. Between 2007 and 2018, suicide rates among the youth of ages 10 to 24 in the United States increased by 57%. Becoming the second leading cause of death for individuals in that age range. That seems probably the most concerning statistic that I've heard out of everything we'll be talking about today. And then in Ohio, 1 in 3 students report challenges with anxiety. I think that's probably a national statistic, if you really look at that. And the number of high school age kids with major depressive episodes have nearly doubled over the past decade. So those are some of the facts that we're facing within our communities right now, but it's really impacting and overflowing into our school systems. Because here we are, we've taken all these kids and put them in one location. And then I said, okay, go ahead and go do all the academic things with them.
Yeah, sure.
And we're not really addressing this other stuff, so.
Yeah, a lot of the same kind of statistics, right? I kind of looked at pulling stuff from the CDC, Center for Disease Control, and their numbers, and even looking at from 2016 to 2019, things have gotten, I hate to say gotten worse, but numbers have increased, I guess, is the nicest way of saying that. Since the pandemic, again, it just kind of accelerated some things that probably already existed. But from 16 to 19 those years, from ages 3 to 17, you have students with ADHD, it's like 9.8%, right? About 6 million kids as far as in the country go. Anxiety, that hovering just below 10% as well. Behavior problems, about 9% of students, and depression, about 4.5% of students, which again, when you're talking about the nation, ends up being like 2.7 million students. If you kind of hone in on, I'm not saying like the younger ages don't have more of the mental health issues or aren't a part of the mental health crisis. They certainly are. It's kind of different ways though that are the most concerning parts when you look at like the younger, like kind of elementary school, I guess, versus middle school and high school. There tends to be like a shift a little bit in like what is looked at and just extent of numbers, just from what I've kind of looked at. So adolescence, all that to say, adolescence. So if you're looking at ages 12 to 17, there's definitely an increased concern for depression, substance abuse, and suicide. Those all kind of go up. So some of the numbers for that, not just keep hitting you with numbers, it's got to be hard to listen to on a podcast, but 15.1% have suffered a major depressive episode. So this is the other thing I did is I kind of pulled it out to be like out of 25 kids. So that's kind of got to be close to an average class, maybe 25
Yeah.
to 30 kids. So let's say in a class size of 25, there are people out there right now that are saying, I wish I had a class size of 25. I'm sorry if you're like sitting at like 37 and you're like, I wish I had a class size of 25. But in a class size of 25, that would mean that 4 of your students, statistics would say, would have a major depressive episode. 36.7% persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness. That'd be 9 out of your 25 kids in that room. Like persistent feelings of sadness and hopelessness. That's a lot of kids. 9 out of 25. 15.7% again have made a suicide plan. Again, that falls in about that 4 student range out of 25. Which is concerning. And then about 9%, 8.9, about 9% have actually attempted their plan of suicide, which would be about 2 of 25 students, which again is pretty shocking number-wise. And then 1 in 6 students, just jumping again in general, ages 2 to 8, kind of going the other direction, the younger age. Children age 2 to 8, about 1 in 6 students have some sort of mental, behavioral, or developmental disorder that has been at ages 2 to 8. Which is a lot. Again, that's like 16.5%, which ends up being about 4 out of every 25 kids.
Yeah.
That's a lot in a classroom that have some sort of mental, behavioral, or developmental disorder that they've been diagnosed with. So again, I just felt like it seemed to resonate a little bit more with me once I started putting it in like how many kids in a classroom.
Yeah, and I
Like,
think
it felt
that
a little bit
seems
more
about
real.
right. You think about kids on 504 plans that usually end up
Yeah.
on 504s because of those categories, or our students on IEPs that have OHI, emotional disturbance, those kind of things all fall. And you look at a class, I would say, yes, that seems about right. So this is kind of,
obviously some classrooms might have less. Some classrooms are going to end up having more.
Yeah.
It's just how it goes. But when you look at it as far as like national numbers, it's about where it falls. So yeah, pretty intense. Obviously it's a big deal. Okay. So then why is this happening though? I mean, it's a real downer to hear that it is happening. It's not a chipper way to start off, first 8 minutes of a podcast that you're listening to. So if you've hung in there this long, thanks for that. But why is it happening?
the Ohio Department of Education
Kind
and
of $1 million
workforce.
question,
Yeah,
right? I mean,
right,
so let's
yeah.
start there. It's not like we have some magic answer to
Yeah.
this, but
And nobody really does, right? But I would, from feedback and, the people that do the research and analysis of this go back to academic pressure. We have a high pressure on our kids to perform very, very high, to take all the honors classes, to get into the best college, to do this one track kind of idea, or maybe what parents want for their children, right? They feel all this pressure to do that. I'm a big proponent of no homework or very little homework. I'm very vocal about that. There's no research that supports that homework benefits kids, and actually has a tremendous amount of mental health. It doesn't help kids' mental health at all because we're never giving them a time to rest or do the other social things that they're supposed to be doing. They're doing sometimes hours and hours worth of homework every night, which is
Yeah, it can get
insanity.
crazy. Yeah.
These kids are working 14, 15-hour days, which is crazy to me.
Yeah.
On top of trying to be in sports or band or whatever else. Social pressures, bullying. So we look at this a lot with online social media, and it's just constant.
yeah.
It's not the person writing a note to you in class or calling and hanging up on your phone line or sending you something on your pager like we had growing up. This is systemic and viral kind of where it's spreading really fast, and it's happening all day, every day during the school day.
Yeah.
Kids are posting stuff, sending stuff out, putting things out about other kids. It is crazy. I cannot imagine growing up in the social media era. And you're talking about the statistics with kids. The age range you talked about with adolescent is the introductory of social media
Yeah.
for kids.
Yeah. And so not only is it happening, I don't know, is some of this stuff happening like during school in person, but then also the online component is also happening during the school day potentially. That's where you're getting now the like so many cell phone like policies and
There's going to be a cell phone ban in
regulations,
schools. Yeah,
right?
you can't have your phones out anymore.
Yeah.
So I know in Ohio.
I mean, there's
anyways,
all kinds of stuff that's
Yeah, the other thing that was mentioned was overscheduling. We've talked about this a ton on the podcast, but if you think you're giving your kids every opportunity possible and you think you're giving them experience and stuff, but we're actually really overscheduling our kids where they never have rest. So they're operating just constantly stressed and anxiety ridden because of going to the next thing or getting ready for the next thing or overperforming. I was watching something. I don't remember. I'm on vacation mode right now. I don't remember. I was watching something and somebody said, there's families that are kid-centered families where the whole family schedule revolves around all the kids' stuff.
Yeah.
And then there's parent-centered families where the parents' schedule dominates what the kids are doing and the kids are kind of left behind. And there's families who make sure everyone's individual needs are being met, and then they operate together, and everything is presented. I think it's Brene Brown. I was watching something for Brene Brown. And then the family, any decisions made, the family presents it together. They make joint decisions together. What's going to work for our family? And that really shifted my mindset a little bit about how, because sometimes you do feel guilty, like my kids aren't in something every single night, or maybe that, or I feel guilty going out and doing something and not being with my kids that night, or saying,
Sure.
you know what, no, you're not doing that because I have something else planned. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of balance with that, but I thought that was such a good way to put it. So think about, is your family a family where the decisions are jointly made together and that it's making sure it meets everyone's needs within the family unit. So and then the difficult peer relationships, which I think are ongoing school-based related issues.
Yeah. You covered a good number of the things that I said. I think one, you have an increased ACE count. I think especially looking ahead, like for younger kids now, looking ahead, it doesn't even have to necessarily be younger kids. One of the fallout things of the pandemic for sure was so many people were at home, and some kids then were in a environment that was lent itself to having adverse childhood experienced that they wouldn't have been if everybody had been going to work and at school and in their normal routine. And so there's an uptick that they found from that lockdown kind of time in ACEs and just the prevalence of being able to experience that. So there is that, which is definitely a downer. And again, that pandemic effect of that in general. I think looking at not just social media, but screen time in general, and especially at younger ages, although honestly, just any age, the amount of time that we're on a screen, some things just real quick that leads to when we're on a screen a lot. So, which some of these studies too, just as a side note, it was interesting. They were they categorized things from low amounts of screen time, moderate amounts of screen time, and high amounts of screen time. The low amount of screen time was considered to be 1 hour a day. Moderate was 4 hours a day.
Wow.
And high was 7 hours a day. So, I mean, even the fact that moderate, in the 4 hour a day range seems like a lot. But so here's some of the things when you have more screen time leads to an increase in internalizing problems like depression, anxiety, and social anxiety. Even 2 years after the dependency on screen time has stopped. So imagine you have a 5-year-old that's on screens, 7 hours a day.
Yep.
Right. So you can expect what they're finding is you can expect even 2 years from now when that kid's 7, they're still having fallout like depression, anxiety, and social anxiety. Or you have a 14-year-old that's on a screen nonstop, they're just constantly on a screen. And then still when they're 16, they're still dealing with the fallout of some of these effects. Reduced social emotional growth, which isn't super shocking, right? It reduces the quality and the quantity of interactions kids have with their caregivers at a young age, and then makes it harder for kids to interpret emotions, leading to aggression potentially as they get older. Increased developmental delays, again, as on the younger side of things, and that's, again, more than 4 hours a day on a screen, as you end up as early as 1-year-old, you might start just seeing those delays, right? In delays in communication, problem solving, fine motor skills, and social personal skills by the age of 2 and 4 years old. So if you're even on a screen really early on, problem, right? So then and then this is the other one that I think really impacts teenagers the most, is the messed up circadian rhythms, and probably adults. So just FYI. I mean, certainly it does the little kids too, but just humans in general. Let's just go with that. So the messed up circadian rhythms. So blue light prevents melatonin production. Such a thing now for people to take melatonin when in reality it's because we're just inhibiting our body's ability to create it on its own. So watching TV or playing games prior to bed leaves the brain and body active and awake. Can't tell you how many number of students I've had over the years who who are just exhausted all the time. And then feedback that we get from parents is they just don't go to sleep. They just can't sleep. You dig into it a little bit more frequently, not always, but frequently you find out that the, kid has like they have a PlayStation, whatever in their room and a TV in their room. They've got a phone or a tablet they're allowed to have in their room. Man, if I could give you some unsolicited advice, it would be no screens in your rooms, in the bedrooms. Like keep them out for your kids. There is no reason for that, and it's going to be helpful for sleep and any number of other things like being able to monitor what they're on and things like that. All right, off the high horse about the screens in general. And then, like you said, in social media, especially between ages 10 and 19, although social media, it seemed like there for a bit was getting younger. I think we're starting to see a shift in that, hopefully, where more and more parents are realizing that that's a bad idea at a young age. But there are unbelievable negative impacts of social media, from being addicted to screens and being on them to all the negative impacts, especially for girls. It's a big thing for girls, adolescent girls,
because of the body image,
and also girls are really good about bullying. In a very stereotypical way, I will say that what they find is that boys tend to bully in one way, and then females tend to bully in a different way. And social media tends to lend itself towards the way that females tend to bully historically. And so I think that's an important thing to be aware of, regardless of boy or girl, does not matter. Be aware if you have students out there when they are allowed on social media. Just don't know that there's a whole lot of benefit to it compared to the negative
and there's a lot of documentaries out there right now
Plenty
that
to
are
watch.
and other podcasts listen to that just dedicated to this topic about the impacts, right?
All right. How is this impacting our schools then, all this stuff?
Well, factors like these can lead to increased resentment and teacher burnout. Boy, is this a huge crisis in the United States right now.
Yeah.
We said a third of the teachers were leaving the fields. I think we have, time and time again, personally have known people just said, I'm out.
Yeah.
They end up leaving or like retiring like mid-year.
Yeah.
I can't imagine that happening 10 years ago where people were just like, I'm going to retire in February.
Yeah.
That's just, I mean, that's happening, hearing about that more and more often. People just want out of education because it's because of this issue, right? It's so overwhelming, as well as increased mental health problems due to chronic stress. So teachers, I think, at the brink of just chronically just being so stressed out all the time. Because of these demands, teacher turnover rates have reached new highs. In some places, up to 70% of first-year teachers end up quitting.
It's pretty high.
Yeah, and we look at school funding being restricted depending on where you live and how your schools are funded, where you're having to hire new teachers because you can't afford the veteran teachers. Good luck finding the new teachers where it was not uncommon to be hired. I was hired like the week before school started. And that was not uncommon to get a job at the last minute as they were hiring. And but now it's like you can't find even new teachers to hire, and especially when you look at these really specialized positions, that's almost near impossible to find people. And really it goes back to networking, banking on those relationships you have with people to be able to find some people to even of quality to interview. So it's really massively impacting your educational system. Yeah,
I was thought about the teacher burnout for sure. I think it also impacts like how people look at our schools, like outside of education. I think that's a big thing because I think what you default to, what people who aren't in education default to is, well, when I was in school, this is what it wasn't like this. So it must be somebody's fault, right? Like people want to find fault, which is a natural thing. We want to find like the reason.
Yeah.
Our brains kind of work that way. And so people that aren't in education then tend to blame education, and the people that are in education or how education is being done. I think then, we've obviously talked a lot about trauma and trauma-informed care and social emotional learning, all the things on this podcast. I think that kind of gets a bad rap, like because of, as opposed to people realizing that this is kind of a result, like we're leaning heavier into this because of some of the mental health crisis that's existing. Like they want to, I think it's easy to look at it and say like, oh, the mental health crisis is happening. It's kind of made up because of this other push about trauma and, social emotional
Yeah.
learning and all these things, like, and so we're treating kids different, and that's why this is happening. I just think it really impacts how people that aren't in education look at education, and that includes parents too. And I think that can be sometimes difficult to navigate then as teachers or as administrators, when people maybe don't understand as much. And it can feel incredibly personal, so you have to kind of take that out of the equation. And then you already touched on teacher burnout for sure. I think it also, one of the ways this impacts schools is that there are students that get missed.
Yeah.
And we don't have a lot of time to go into that too deep, but like I think that for sure happens. There are a lot of students that get missed.
Yeah.
Now.
Dr. Perry talks about that. We used this in training, him and Oprah talking South by Southwest for educators, and he says the kids that we should be most concerned about are the ones that are the most quiet.
Yeah. So I think that happens a lot because there's focus on high achieving kids. There's focus on kids that have really noticeable challenges that they're up against, and then there's a group of kids that just kind of float through potentially, and so to be aware of that. All right, so what can we do as a community to support our schools, our teachers, our children now?
Okay, so here's from OD's website again, 7 tips how to build mental health awareness in schools. So the first one, provide teachers with professional development. We could not agree more. Essentially why we started this podcast. Promote positive self-esteem, encourage balanced eating and healthy, just a general wellness, right? I think when you eat well, physically or exercising, you feel well. How do you promote that with kids, with educators, and create a culture and climate where everyone's just feeling their best? Provide safe outlets to manage big feelings. So think about what that looks like in your school for both educators and students. Set an open door policy. This is really vitally important for administrators that everything's not taken. This is a hard one for me at times. I have to stop and think, how can you take it not personally, but it uses an opportunity to lend and support somebody. Involve caregivers, so it's that wraparound services with family support, and offer counseling referrals. And I would go a step further is that we're going to start restructuring how schools are set up, that we haven't really needed or really addressed those issues. Not that they weren't there.
Sure.
But like we said, they're becoming more prevalent, and we know more, we do better. Schools need to have a mental health therapist, school counselors full-time in the building, a school psychologist.
Yeah.
We need to be thinking about programs like Hope Squad at every school to get like the student community bought in, therapy dogs in. There's lots of PD that needs to be happening at a grassroots effort and creating positions different. We're going to look at positions differently. We're going to need people who specialize in behavior and mental health in every school to support teachers and kids.
Yeah.
So those are some things.
Yeah, I think it just really does take a whole community to raise healthy, happy kids, right? So part of that community is at school, recognizing that's part of that community time. I think part of that community is at home, recognizing that that's also a pretty significant part of the community time. And part of that community is not at either of those places, right? It's actually out in the community. And I think sometimes we don't think about that maybe as much. School and home get a pretty big chunk of the time, for sure, and get focused on a lot. But there's also that time that's like actually we're out in the community. The kids are. And so I would say get involved in things that are out in your community. That's like a good way to like help out. Easy way is if you have your own kids is to join in the things like help be, I'm not in charge. I'm not saying take more on yourself, but like volunteer to be a part of things that are happening out in the community. Go to things that are happening out in your community. And if there isn't much, maybe like look to start some of that. Easy ways like be a coach, right? Volunteer to help out with teams or with events or with plays or with musicals. You don't have to be the one running it. If you're like, I can't do that. Be like, hey, how can I help out though? Frequently, little Justin tip here, frequently when my kids are involved in things, it'll ask, it's one of the questions, would you want to run one of these? Would you want to be a coach? I always say no. And then at the very first meeting, I always go up to who's in charge and I say, hey, I'd love to be able to help you out in any way you can. If you're interested, how can I help out? Because then I know there's at least 2 of us. That's always my move.
Yeah.
If everybody does that, obviously then there's no coaches. Don't do that all the time. But like, if you're not somebody, if you're like, I absolutely wouldn't want to be in charge, Do that though. Like, don't sign up to be in charge, and then go up and tell the person that is in charge, hey, I'd love to help out. Like, I can do what I can to help out and be here to help support. Do those kind of things. I think those are helpful things out in the community that you can do. Obviously, you talked about training for teachers. I would also say advocate for parent education in the school district that you're in. This also requires probably having people that can educate, so be aware of that. Maybe you become the person that can help educate parents, but offer, whether it's family nights, whether it's like parent education nights. I don't know what that necessarily looks like, but we've talked before about if there's one thing that we could do to help schools, it would be catch young parents of really young kids, like new parents,
Yes,
and
absolutely.
educate them on what it means to bring up a really healthy, happy, like centered kind of kid at a really young age, those first like 1,000 days of life, right? Like, what do you need to be doing? Like, find ways to have the district invest in kids that aren't even in the school yet. I think if schools could do that, that would put that district ahead when it came time for those kids to be in the school, because parents would have the education they needed and the support they needed. I don't know how that looks. I'm sure there are organizations out there doing that right now and districts out there doing that right now. I just think that's a huge deal. And I think it's important to educate parents then that do have kids in school as well about things like screen time, things like social media, things like, you know, whatever the next thing is that's coming that we don't even know yet. Educate parents, have the time to educate parents, because parents want to know. They're wanting to do a good job. I don't know that I've ever met any parent that I've ever thought they don't want to be a good parent.
Yeah.
Like, people want to do a good job, but they maybe need the skills to do it. And so we can help out in those ways, I think.
And the support.
Yes. Yeah,
Support
absolutely.
system, yeah.
All right. What would be one thing you'd want people to walk away knowing today from this episode?
I think this is a problem that we hear about all the time through social media or those kind of things, but this is a problem that we can see improvements on. But it's going to take a village to do their part and to essentially re-educate schools. Essentially, and why we started the podcast, right? Districts need to start a task force, create positions, begin working on this from the ground up. There's enough research, enough action items that we just got to start putting things in place. We start getting some momentum behind this, then I think we know the brain science says you can't do anything academically if you can't regulate yourself and get your mental health needs met. So that has to be prioritized if we want to see great academic growth and if we want to see teacher retention. So it goes both ways. And I would encourage families, if you're one that is easy, sometimes we have families that are easy to criticize the school district or a teacher, those kind of things. Just know that just like our kids are, our educators are also on the brink. So be gentle, be supportive, and offer a partnership and a common solution that we're all doing our best. I think anybody in education really is truly doing their best, and that think about how can I help support and walk alongside you to improve the outcome not only for my child but for other children in the classroom. So
that doesn't mean don't advocate for your kid, but it means like how do you do that? Like right, like I think do that in a partnering way. Really do the best way you can to like do that in a way that is partnering and kind and but obviously hopefully not. But if you do run into really tough times, I mean, still, you're obviously always advocating for your kid.
Yeah.
I think for me, I just kept thinking, again, teachers have got into this profession not just because they like teaching academic content. I mean, I think that's a part of it. It's part of the reason why you got in. But pretty much across the board, you talk to teachers and they got into this work at any age level because they want to make an impact in the lives of kids, of students. And so if you're a teacher out there, I would say advocate for learning what you need to know to make an impact on the students that need it the most, that you may not know how to help. I mean, if you're, we hear this all the time, I don't know how to help these students. I don't know how to work with a student that has some of these mental health issues going on in their life right now. I'm not sure what the approach is. That's why I always try to just pass it on to a counselor or whatever else. Yeah. So advocate for yourself. Ask for help. Ask for ways that you can be trained more. We had a whole episode, a handful of episodes ago, good handful of episodes ago, about some of the trainings that we've gone through. Go back and listen to that and ask for those trainings to be trained in those. We've had recent episodes with guests on talking about some of the ways that you might be able to get trained, or that your district could be trained in some of these things. And so I think advocate for yourself, pass this on potentially to people in your district. Some of the statistics, it doesn't take long. You can ask either of us to look up some of the statistics that are out there, and talk to administration, talk to people high up about what might be good training for everyone to have, so that people can feel equipped in more than just academic content areas. Because that's important. Don't hear me say that academics aren't important. They are crazy important.
That's why we have schools, right?
However, we also need to be trained to be super competent in all these other areas of behavior, mental health, things like that, well-being. It's important.
Yep.
All right. Well, we appreciate, as always, you guys jumping in and being a part of the conversation with us. We just invite you again, share this episode with somebody that might need to hear it. Hopefully it wasn't too heavy of an episode. Hopefully it encourages you that there are ways that we can be better as well, and that we can move forward. And as always, let's go out there and do the work.
Yeah, keep doing it.
Hey, everybody, let's keep the conversation going.
Like and subscribe below and keep the comments rolling.